What's up? Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Culture and Cigars. I want to say thank you to everyone that's been following and subscribing so far. You can subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, and of course SoundCloud. Leave a comment or something, just and I'll get back to you. Today I got with me today a special guest, Dr. Stallworth. Gonna introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is DeWayne Stallworth, and I am professor here at American Baptist College. I've been here going on 3 years. I teach in the areas of religion/theology and psychology. So I teeter on both those realms.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your educational background.
Okay. Well, I graduated from Tennessee State University. That was in 03.
Mm-hmm.
I was a political science major. I wrote a senior project on injustice in the Deep South, case study of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. And during that research, I was fortunate to come across, personalities such as Bill Baxley in Birmingham, Alabama. He was the Assistant Attorney General for that case, and N.H. Smith, who was a dear friend of Dr. King, who was shot during the Civil Rights Movement. So just interacting with them and knowing that these are primary sources, individuals that actually engaged what I'm studying.
Yeah.
That promoted me to go a little further. Now, initially, being a political science major, I was going to law school.
Yeah.
All right. But during that senior year, that's when I began grappling with notions of ministry and religion. So I interned at a law firm, getting ready to go to law school, but had a shift of thought regarding my profession, my career, and went to seminary.
Mm-hmm.
So that led me to Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, where I was focusing on counseling and divinity work.
Yeah.
Then I went on to Capella for a PhD in counseling, then studied at Vanderbilt for a minute, then Chicago Theological Seminary. That's kind of how all those disciplines wrap together.
Yeah.
I am an existentialist at heart, meaning that, I focus on, what gives meaning, how do people define meaning in their lives, particularly within the context of being Black in America. And that entails knowing one's religious history, pursuits, and also what is the psychological effect of oppression and religion and things of that nature.
Okay, so what made you want to go for political science at first?
I think just being around, I was influenced by my environment. I grew up in a household. I was raised by my uncle, who is a pastor, but also a politician.
Mm-hmm.
So I was always around that type of paradigm, intellectual thinking about what it means to be Black in the political realm, what it means to be Black in America regarding church structure, what it means to be Black and oppressive states, being in Alabama, and how to maneuver those different realms. And my uncle did such a marvelous job at displaying that model, being the first Black tax assessor in Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really, really impressed with how he carried himself and his educational background. So when I went to school, I too said, I think I should be a lawyer. So political science was the obvious route to achieve that end.
So you're originally from Alabama?
I was born in Detroit, Michigan.
Okay.
I lived there for several years and moved to Alabama when my mother passed.
Yeah.
I was a young boy, my mother passed, so her family is from Alabama.
Okay.
So my siblings and I, moved down south, and we will always go back to Detroit when we were not in school.
Mm-hmm.
So I think up to the age of maybe 14 or 15,
Yeah.
I stopped going every summer.
Okay.
So those two worlds were a part of my identity. Yeah, growing up as a child.
And how did you end up going to TSU?
Well, doing research, I started off at a predominantly white school, and I wasn't satisfied with the cultural presentation of what it means to be black. Wonderful education. I had a wonderful time, learning about Eurocentric thought.
Yeah.
But at that stage, it was important for me to get a foundation of what it truly means to be black. That means reading, what black people had to say about themselves versus what white people thought about them.
Yeah.
So I figured, the best way to accomplish that goal is to attend an HBCU. And I visited, several, came to Tennessee State University, absolutely loved it. Had a chance to talk to several professors. The interesting thing about, being at TSU, trying to get away from the imbalance of white and black instruction, I can recall having maybe 2 black professors at TSU.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, just being around black people on that level did a lot for me in terms of giving me confidence as a black man.
Okay. What about when do you think college play a major role in how some people get quote unquote woke? Because I notice it's the one when people go to college, that's when they start posting this, conscious stuff.
Yeah. Or reading books.
Reading books. Yeah.
Or, there's nothing wrong with reading books. I encourage people to read all the time. But there ought to be some type of guidance and structure to how we read and what we read, to challenge, what we read. So I think that experience happens in a class setting, where you can be instructed on whatever it is that you're reading. And, some things contradict that you may not catch outside of your own thinking. So that's why it's always good to, cross-pollinate with individuals, have discussion, intellectual banter. This is what I think, this is what I think, this is what I read. And you can put all that stuff on the table, and you can be corrected if your thought is far left or far right. And you don't have the opportunity if you're isolated to your own thought process.
Okay.
So I think it's important for students, for seekers of knowledge, to surround themselves with people that don't necessarily think like them. I don't have an issue with what is called the Hotep movement in and of itself.
Yeah.
But I think it should be broadened in scope in terms of what is read and how it's understood at a deeper level. And beating people over the head about not being black or not being sincere is disingenuous, in my opinion, for someone who has read maybe 3 or 4 books, and all of a sudden, as you stated, they are now woke. Well, it takes time. So we have to be patient with people, just because we come across some information that has enlightened us, which is a good thing. We have to be more patient and know that, okay, just like I had a journey to get here, other people have journeys to get to.
Yeah.
So I think, the Ivory Tower allows that type of process for individuals. They give them the space to grow, not at their own pace, but in a comfort zone that doesn't necessarily overwhelm them and isolate them to their own thought.
So you saying you should read people that might contradict what you believe in order to expand your horizon of knowledge?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's always good to have, a broad reading list.
Yeah.
So you're not just centered in this isolated thought regarding this topic. You don't have to believe everything that you read, but it's good to be informed. It gives you a base of what is being said, what has been said, to what could be said.
Yeah.
Right. So I think just a broad reading list can, stretch your mind and give you different paradigms of thought that you didn't come to the table with. And then, you go deeper with that when you engage individuals about these particular readings.
Yeah.
So I never recommend just reading, Black literature. I am an advocate for Black literature, but in terms of becoming educated, one ought to engage, readings and materials beyond their own space and culture. And that takes time.
Yeah. Because, growing up Christian Baptist, we was real, conservative. And, I think a lot of times that can hurt you because, with Baptists, if you don't, if you're not in line with us, we just going to tune you out. Yeah. But I think sometimes it helps you, when you read, say you're reading the atheist book. Yeah. Sometimes it's good to be informed in what they're saying. That way you can study to defend what you believe. Right. Because they're going to come this way. Right. So I kind of believe, that's what is hurting a lot of people with educating themselves is because they want to just read what they believe. Yeah. You're absolutely right. And to that point, some people don't have that network of influence. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's some people can't go to school. A 4-year, 3 times a week, et cetera, whatever the case may be. Yeah. But it's 2017, so we have online, all these different, avenues and spaces that can engage you at different levels. So there's no reason why someone should be isolated to their own thought process regarding any particular subject matter, because we have too much at our fingertips. Yeah. Literally. Yeah. Do you think you could be so woke that you're confused? I never heard it put that way, but okay. You're so woke that you're confused. That makes sense. Yeah. That makes sense. I personally, I don't dislike the phraseology. Woke, stay woke. I prefer wake up. Wake up. Because a lot of us are sleeping. So in order to quote unquote stay woke, you must first be woken. Yeah. So my premise is enlightenment. That will keep a person burning with desire to seek more truth. Versus telling them what truth is. I don't want to tell you what to think. My job as a professor is to teach you how to think. That means engaging your mind at different levels with different materials, creating your own paradigm of processing material and thought and things of that nature based on your own life experiences, your personality, your likes, your dislikes. All of that entails education. So, telling you to stay woke, well, and I get it. I get the underlying premise is, be aware. There are systems in place that are designed to cripple you each and every day. So I get the notion that involves alertness. I just take a different approach. Some people can stay in that realm and they want to keep people, alert. Yeah. My job is to enlighten them, to wake them up. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, because I kind of I get to stay woke, what you said, awakening. And then once you're woke, you know, you got to keep, what I get from it is, keep paying attention, keep studying and stuff. So How did you end up coming to American Baptist, being a professor?
Well, I did consulting, and I taught in Alabama for several years.
Mm-hmm.
Moved back here, and I did some consulting on an individual level, but I also did consulting for the state of Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
And options, came up while consulting about teaching and things of that nature. And the recommendations are always there. Hey, you ought to be back in the classroom teaching and things of that nature. So just looking at different avenues. I had always heard of American Baptist College, and my desire was to get into a space where I can touch the hearts and minds of young ministers, and not just ministers, but young Black people in a small space that didn't necessarily come with all of the skills that you would get at your more advanced institutions. And that's not to say that these students lack a certain wherewithal in terms of educational pursuits, but to some degree, it's about presenting them with different structures and materials that will arouse curiosity.
Yeah.
And begin to wake them up, over their matriculation as a student here. So, hearing that narrative from several other professors and clergy in the school
Mm-hmm.
allowed me to come into this space and say, okay, yeah, you know what, I think I can plant seed here.
Did you find it rough, like, because you teach in psychology
Mm-hmm.
and sociology, that kind of, it's kind of rough teaching that to young ministers and stuff, because all they're thinking about is the Bible and stuff, and like now you telling them to think about the society that we live in and stuff.
And I get it. I think that's the challenge for me,
Mm-hmm.
To integrate, because it all ties in.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to kind of drop little nuggets along the way to say, hey, it actually connects to the church,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll get to that piece at a broader and more deep level through the next couple of years in different courses.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, we have to understand that hey, this is how society works. This is how society thinks of the marginalized, the oppressed, and how does one in this category define meaning?
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, people in any congregation that is pastored by a person of color has to grapple with this question. How does this give me meaning? Regardless of where they are, they come with so many different burdens. And the pastor has to be equipped not to just talk to people about Jesus, because that wasn't Jesus's position.
Yeah.
The greatest sermon that Jesus preached was his life.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do even just a survey analysis of his narrative, we will find that Jesus was constantly engaging society.
Mm-hmm.
Constantly, you've heard this said, but now I say. So, society has defined it this way, but being God, this is what it truly means. So it's important for people to understand, even though systems are set up and designed to work according to, human calculations and structures, there is a God that says this isn't right, and this is how it ought to work. So we need people, we need clergy to understand this context and present it to people, so we're not overwhelmed by these systems, which can easily frustrate us.
Yeah.
If we're not prepared and understand them, at their base level.
So what would you say to people that feel like the church shouldn't be so political? Like,
Mm-hmm.
Just stick to what's in the Bible, don't bring in all this other stuff. Like, some people feel like, I come to church not to hear about the world, but to escape from the world.
Mm-hmm.
And here you is preaching, talking about what's going on and stuff. Can I just get a break?
Yeah.
So how you?
No, that's a very good observation. I think that is correct. I think people, they drag into church.
Mm-hmm.
on Sunday, trying to get away from the world.
Yeah.
And this is deeply rooted in Black historical context. So Black people have been doing this since we stepped on the shores of North America, trying to forget the painful reality of being in America and escaping, in hush harbors in the woods in our own religious context, worshiping God as our forebears did in Africa freely, without restraint. And just for that brief moment, we had a catharsis, we had an emotional release of the frustrations of life. That allowed us to enjoy that space for that very moment. But then we had to go back to the field.
Yeah.
So that is kind of what we're getting now in 2017. Same mentality.
Yeah.
Where people are, quote unquote, in the field. And on Sunday, the hush harbors, they just want to give me God, give me religion, give me Jesus, give me strength, give me purpose that I can go back out here and do what I have to do. I don't necessarily think that is God's plan for Black people, for any people for that matter, to go into a holy and righteous religious space and simply deal with a type of religious osmosis. God would touch you and boom, you're free.
Yeah.
But you still have to deal with reality when you leave. A lot of people don't know how to deal with reality, so that's one reason why it's not addressed in the churches.
Okay.
Because they don't necessarily have the tools to talk about oppression on a deep level, or I mean even at a base level. I mean, if you go through the canon of Scripture. The Christian canon of Scripture, you can read from Old Testament to the New. God is constantly dealing with sociological dysfunction. From the prophet of Amos, talking about social ills, the prophet Micah, prophet Isaiah, the prophet Jeremiah, all the way to Jesus of Nazareth, right? Going and talking about this woman at the well that no one in society will touch because they deem her less than. But Jesus breaks down that sociological barrier, and being clergy situates himself in the middle of that and says, God does not agree with this. So at some level, Black clergy will have to step in the midst of this sociological fire and say, I stand against this because God stands against it.
Yeah.
So it's the onus is on Black clergy to stand up for the murders that are occurring in our communities, the lack of health care, food deserts, all mental health issues, all these different components that affect the person, not just religious, but socio, psycho, all these different components make up the personhood. So the pastor has to be equipped to not only address the religious aspect of the person, but every facet.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one of your classes, you said we are witnessing the Black church do what they did during the civil rights era. Can you explain that?
Well, I can't quite recall the context of that statement, but I'll give it my own in the here and now. I would say that we're seeing media become a critical piece of liberation for the oppressed.
Yeah.
In the 60s, the civil rights movement really, really grabbed hold of the world's heart when it was televised internationally that in Birmingham, Alabama, children were being fire hosed, beaten, dogs were let loose, all these different components, and people, they may have heard about it, they may have read about it, but for the international press to actually see it, to see the horror and the hypocrisy of America at face value, that changed the reality of the game for Black people in this country.
Yeah.
All right. The over the past, I would say, 2.5 years of media that we've seen of Black bodies, the dysfunction of Black bodies, i.e., being killed by white authority figures.
Yeah.
Right. That was done through media. It had been done throughout the years, throughout the years. But it's only when people can see it face to face that it pricks their heart and says, "This is horrible." And this is done in a country that says that all men are created equal, and we know that that's not true. So it's the hypocritical piece that America has to grapple with, but media has allowed that conversation to be broadened in scope. Now, I think the downside to the 21st century piece is that we can become desensitized, right? So if we see a Black body in the street this month,
yeah,
the police killed another, and next month the police killed another, and the next month police killed another. If we're not quote unquote woke,
yeah,
right, it becomes so normal. It becomes the norm that it doesn't affect us with that like it did that first punch. So I think that's what a lot of those advocates mean when they bring that phraseology up. Don't let this run through a psychological theme in your life where it just normalizes that this is normal.
Yeah.
No, this is abnormal. And every time we see a Black body in the street, we need to address it like it's the first one we've ever seen. So that's my fear, is that as a community, we're going to become desensitized to notions of Blackness being terrorized by white authority if we're not careful, if we don't stay, as you put it, woke.
Okay. The first time that I heard the word Black privilege was in your class. Can you? I was told like privilege was like I heard a white privilege.
Right.
Where my professor in my social justice class, she made us all crumble up some paper.
Right.
And she put a trash can in the middle of the classroom. Those that was close up, they shot it in easily, but us in the back, we had to use a lot of force and we still missed it. And she said that's what privilege is.
Okay.
So like
excellent illustration.
So what I didn't think Black people
could have privilege. Yeah. Okay, well that's some of my current research. Right. So we focus, and this is not to negate white privilege.
Yeah.
That is indeed a reality. Right. It is there. But white privilege created Black privilege. So when you have an enslaved people, for years it was argued that the very essence of our Africanism was lost as a result of the voyage from Africa to North America, South America, etc., throughout the slave trade. Right? But we know that some things came over, and at the center and the heart of our Blackness is religious thought. Now it did bother that developed view of religion, right? But there are innate religious and psychological tenets of what it means to be Black that are in me because they were in my great grandfather's psyche.
Yeah.
So those things, notions of what it means to be a community, for instance. All right. That is at the center of what it means to be Black. We have always had a notion of oneness.
Yeah.
There is no me without you. So whatever we do, we have to work together if we want to succeed. And that has always been the brilliance of what it means to be Black.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the engagement of being enslaved somewhat disrupted. It didn't annihilate it.
Yeah.
But it disrupted it just a bit. And it created a space for white privilege to conquer and divide Blackness. So, for instance, not being able to be your own person. You can't read unless you're allowed to read. You can't preach unless you're allowed to preach. You can't marry, but you can get with so and so if it's allowed. So nothing you did was on your own volition. It was allowed. Even being around certain people, you couldn't be with your family if it wasn't allowed. Now, if you get a particular allowance and you can eat a cookie, whereas there's 20, the one comes out and gets a cookie, and master says, you've been good and you deserve it. You're not like the others, right? Now we have a divide within the oppressed.
Yeah.
We have someone who's oppressed with a cookie who is now still a part of the oppressed system with individuals without a cookie. So what is that engagement like? Does the one with a cookie break it and 20 pieces and share it? That didn't always happen.
Yeah.
So that's what we mean about Black privilege. You have access to things, right? And if you have access, particularly if you have access to power and position, yeah, you are privileged. As a professor, I'm privileged because I have the power and the privilege to educate young minds. That's a privilege that I have. Everyone is not in that position. Yeah. So for me to say that I'm not privileged is being disingenuous, because yes, I do have influence, I have power, and I have position. I have to know this. And if I'm not careful, I become elitist and think that because of education, because of position, and because of power, that individuals are beneath me. Individuals with my own skin color are beneath me.
Yeah.
So I'm doing to them the very thing that was done to me.
Yeah.
So that's kind of contextually what I mean about Black privilege.
Well, going off your illustration of the slave, would you say that Black privilege was kind of like borrowed privilege?
You said borrowed? What do you mean by borrowed?
Okay, like the only reason why that slave with the cookie got his privilege was because the master gave it to him.
Yeah.
So it's not really his privilege, or maybe borrow wasn't the right word. But you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And even if it's given, and the notion of community, which is at the center of our African heritage, does not promote the thought to lift your brothers and sisters up from their lower level, then yes, you're utilizing your privilege for ill.
Yeah.
Everyone has privilege, right? You're being in school, you're privileged because there are a lot of Black people that are not in your position. So you are getting things that they don't get. That's privilege. You can go out and abuse it, and you can go back to your neighborhood and say, you are ignorant, you don't know, you need to do X, Y, Z, you don't know it. You're abusing that privilege because they don't have access to what you have access to. Rather than going back and saying, this is what I learned, or opening up a community center, or developing a mentoring program, things of that nature that will actually funnel from you down to the masses.
Yeah.
That is the only thing that will uplift the black race. If black people with privilege open up their hearts and their minds and allow that influence to trickle down to the masses, that will build everyone one back up. But because privilege is coveted,
Mm-hmm.
don't think for one moment simply because someone says they're black that they are in your arena of being woke.
Mm-hmm.
Their notions of being woke is personal progression and achievement without the masses. I did it. I struggled. I didn't have. I didn't do. And look at me. So if I did it, you can do it. And that's not necessarily true.
Okay.
That's not necessarily true. So that's my theoretical foundation for understanding our plight in America.
Mm-hmm.
Is it has to be funneled down from black privilege.
Yeah. Like, I guess I kind of wrestle with the term because, like, going off, remember I told you the illustration about the
Mm-hmm.
trash can.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I see privilege as having a head start. Like you said, I'm in school, but like someone who has a better, like say a white family, they got more resources.
Right.
So they got into school more easier.
Mm-hmm.
Probably didn't even have to, get financial aid or student loans.
Right.
But someone like me,
Right.
I got to go through those different avenues. So that's how I kind of see like what privilege is. Like I'll give you an example. Like there was like, I can't remember the guy's name that died in prison. They got like a show on Spike. I think it's Khalif Brown, and Jay-Z had a part of it. And they was like, way to go, Jay-Z, use your privilege to tell a story. But I wouldn't think that Jay-Z had privilege because he worked for what he had. I would think privilege would be someone, his daughter, I would say she would have privilege because she has his resources. That's like how I see privilege.
Okay. Well, how many black people are billionaires?
Probably a handful.
Okay, we'll keep it at a handful. We'll keep it at a handful. I'm a little shaky on the exact number, so yeah. I don't want to give numbers, but I will simply say that they are few and far between.
Yeah.
Okay. That's privilege.
Mm-hmm.
When you have the majority, of people, but then you funnel that down to black people. Yes, he worked. Yes, he struggled. But he defined his own destiny through meaning and purpose, which gave him a certain amount of privilege. He can sit and have tea with the president of the United States. He can call him up on the cell phone.
Yeah.
That's access. That's power. That's privilege. That has to be used for good. And I think that he has done some good with this privilege.
Yeah.
But to deny privilege is to deny the argument of black responsibility to community. So to say, well, no, black people can't be privileged. That's a dysfunctional way of even looking at our blackness. What do you mean I can't be privileged? So even in the statement that black people can't be privileged coincides with white ideology regarding the lack of wherewithal in blackness.
Yeah.
So yes, we have to take ownership of our privilege, regardless of how mundane or great it may be. I'm not a billionaire, but I still have privilege.
Yeah.
And I have to operate within my own realm of privilege and make sure that what I have that is privilege, I'm leaving something behind and I'm helping someone else come up to a position where they can then help someone else come up, et cetera, et cetera. But closing doors on black people, not being a team player, for all things black.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, to make the argument that all black people are good is to make the argument that all white people are bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a flawed way of thinking. I don't think that all black people are good. Nor do I think that all white people are bad.
Yeah.
I think that you have, good-hearted individuals on all realms,
Mm-hmm.
right? So just because someone is black does not mean that they will use their position and power to help a person that is also black.
Yeah.
And I think that is perhaps one of the dangers of living in this ideology of being woke. That everyone that looks like you will be your helper, and that's not the case.
Yeah.
That's not the case. But give me time. That's my research. We'll flesh that out a little more.
Yeah.
And once everything is done, perhaps we can sit back down and go over that privilege.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about your book that you wrote?
Yeah, my first book, Stable Conscience, Awareness of God, Self, and Others. For so many years, I had questions just about what does it mean to exist? What does it mean to live in a world where God is not a priority?
Mm-hmm.
And what does it mean to live in a world of dysfunction and chaos, but then find God?
Mm-hmm.
So what happens at that juncture for someone who has had a very tough life, finds God, and thinks to some degree that because of religion, all of their psychological woes are now things of the past.
Yeah.
Well, in my book, I unwrap a lot of this to suggest that we have individuals that fall away from religion, the Christian faith, because they have this misconception that God eradicates all of psychological dysfunction at the moment one confesses that Jesus is Lord.
Yeah.
And it is a process. I believe that God uses circumstances, people, situations to help bring up some of that dysfunction that we are experiencing. And the onus is upon us as human beings, as co-creators with God. I believe that we take ownership with that. If I have the notion that Jesus died for my sin, I must also hold the notion that I'm responsible for doing the work to make sure that I'm fully capable and mentally aware to live out my faith.
Mm-hmm.
That means dealing with past dysfunctions, past pains, etc., versus sweeping them underneath the rug and saying it's all under the blood.
Yeah.
And we know that's not true. Let's consider the divorce rate. And if we are evangelical Christians, then that certainly is an issue regarding family structure.
Mm-hmm.
But that divorce rate that we have, which is high, is an indication that we have a lot of things individually that we have to work on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying that people. I think separation is good for certain things,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think this is an issue of marriage in and of itself. I think this is an issue of individual wherewithal. It's so easy to give up.
Yeah.
On circumstances, things, relationships,
Yeah.
when it doesn't feel good.
Uh-huh.
And I think doing the work actually helps a person, kind of fight through some of those moments where you just throw in the towel, not just in marriage, but in life.
Mm.
And you just press on.
But okay, so but some people when they tell their testimony,
Mm-hmm.
they're like, the Lord changed me. I don't go where I used to go. Don't talk. So are you saying like that's not all the way true?
What do you mean?
Because some people they used to act a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
now they act a different way and they put it all on Jesus, say that God changed them
I got you.
and their lives. Is it because God did it, or is it because they just, mentally aware now and they want to stop doing these things to please God?
I think that has to do with a lot of instruction
Mm-hmm.
and what people are reading.
Yeah.
And I think depending on those things, then people react religiously
Mm-hmm.
to life. So, for instance, if a person is reading very conservative literature on what it means to, engage this, salvific experience, to be saved.
Yeah.
Certain things are set up.
Mm-hmm.
You will experience this. You have to do that. And, so they're going on a model that is based in a theology that doesn't necessarily correlate with their own psychological well-being.
Mm-hmm.
For example, a person who is suffering from addiction, and this person or this book says, God can deliver you from this addiction, and if you're not delivered, it's because you're not strong enough. You're not praying enough. You're not fasting enough. You're not holy enough. That's just not true.
Mm-hmm.
Physiologically, it's not true. And people have to have the space, the psychological space, to deal with these realities that they have to engage on a day-to-day basis. That's why I think, cross-pollination is so important. You just can't talk about God without talking about psychology. You can't talk about God without talking about society. You can't talk about God without talking about economics, justice, So all of that goes back into this notion that all you need is God. And that's not true. So the book just disavows that notion that God is all I need.
Oh, okay.
So it makes the reader aware of self, that I'm a work in progress, that I have components of self that are constantly being chiseled, and it's okay. I have to be aware of others. I have to be aware that just like I'm not perfect, they're not perfect. So for me to put the burden on them to live to this perfected state, again, is wrong, and it's unrighteous. And of course, being aware of God, God's patient. God understands. And if God does not understand, then God is not God.
Yeah.
Right? But we do, in my personal belief, we do, as a Christian, serve a God who understands the past, the present, and the future. So anything that I am, anything that I bring to God, God already knows. So I have to do the work. So I have to become a co-creator with God and establish meaning and purpose in my life based on how God views me, not how I view myself, from a dysfunctional view, and how others view me from a dysfunctional view.
Do you think the Black community, we kind of hurt ourselves because we look at psychological issues as someone being influenced or possessed by the devil? Like the devil is in that girl, something like that.
Yeah, and it's just not the Black church. But it is an issue. It is an issue that we don't. And historically, we have to do an historical analysis on the mental health factor within the Black church. For so many years, we didn't have the intellectual and educational awareness of these things. And that's not to say that we didn't have an awareness of the psyche, because we did. We had an awareness of what it means to not be psychologically well, right? Our forebears had that in Africa. Again, the disruption into this enslaved system is, of course, designed to break down the human body, the human spirit, the human mind, the human soul.
Mm-hmm.
All right. That's the breaking process. And to think that going through a traumatic experience does not leave you wanting more,
Mm-hmm.
that's being disingenuous in terms of acknowledging where we are as Black people. We have to go back to that place and say, you know what? Slavery was very traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
And if these individuals established the foundation of the Black church, then surely some of that was transmitted
Mm-hmm.
generationally.
Yeah.
So I suffer from some of that same stuff. You suffer from some of that same stuff. Why? Because it's in our DNA, and studies now suggest that this is actually true. That trauma resides in DNA and goes from generation to generation. More research has to be done in terms of what that looks like for Black people, but it is certainly a reality.
Yeah.
And I think to your point, you're absolutely correct that because we have been so burdened over the years with oppression and dysfunction, holding near and dear to God has been our source and strength.
Mm-hmm.
It's time to understand that and live through what we preach, that God is the God of all things.
Mm-hmm.
And God may not reach you through a one-on-one, communication of prayer.
Yeah.
But God may talk to you through a person that can help you, address some psychological ills,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if someone says, Lord, please fix my car. God has gifted mechanics
Yeah.
with the ability to fix cars. Lord, heal my body, but you don't want to go to the doctor.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so we put these demands on God because we have tunnel vision and thinking about how God relates to us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's as if it has to be this dynamic of religious experience for it to actually be from God. Well, no, it's as simple as God has provided certain things. Now, then again, the other issue, if you don't have access
Yeah.
to these things, and it's still God, because God still wants us to have access. So as co-creators, we have to go out and disrupt society
Mm-hmm.
and say, this is not right. Blacks ought to have access to healthcare. Blacks ought to have access to mental health services,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. So that's our responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
When we negate that and put it on God, we have the current situation.
So is there any current work you want to talk about? In case anybody want to look out for you.
Well, I'm currently working on my second book, and it deals with Black community.
Okay.
And how that is defined through a religious lens.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully it will be out maybe in six months or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Don't you have a organization you founded or something?
Yeah. SCORE, a stable conscience often requires education. So that's SCORE prompted my first book.
Okay.
So a stable conscience often requires education. I started this organization when I graduated with my BS.
Uh-huh.
And I was doing some mentoring through my local church.
Mm-hmm.
And I just found, young African American males, I think at that time, they were aging in my group, 12 to 17, just empty vessels.
Mm-hmm.
just floating through school, not really having a foundation of how to engage their community,
Yeah.
how to engage, enlightenment, and things of that nature. And it wasn't anything heavy. It was just, going in, having conversation. Some of them didn't have father figures. And, just some of them didn't have brothers. So some of them just needed, someone to say, hey, you can do it.
Yeah.
I did it. I didn't have XYZ, but I can't say that from afar.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I can't drop in and say, oh, you can do it, boom, 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 without giving you the tools. And a critical piece for me was I was a tool.
Mm-hmm.
So at that juncture, some of them had never seen a black college grad, particularly male.
Mm-hmm.
So that was important for me to meet with them and then engage them where they are and to know, you know what, I'm not some superhuman. I'm just like you.
Yeah.
And once you can relate to them at that level, then they too can understand, you know what, I can go on and be whatever I want to be because they know that you are them.
Okay.
You are a mirror and they see themselves in you. So that's again the notion of privilege, right? Going back and showing people what they can do and giving them tools to help them get there versus simply saying, oh, y'all are lazy, you don't want to read. And are some people lazy?
Yeah.
Yes. But even for those that are lazy, I believe if they have the right mentor, for some, if they have the right mentor, the table will turn and they will gather inspiration, that would, take them to a different level. So the other component of that is I don't believe in personal motivation.
Mm-hmm.
So I've never tagged and I've never asked to be tagged a motivational speaker.
Oh, okay.
You can only motivate yourself. I can inspire you.
Mm-hmm.
So you can say, you know what? Looking at him, listening to him, I'm inspired to go and read this or go and do that. But when that inspiration is gone, motivation has to kick in.
Yeah.
And I can't give you that. That has to come from within.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a critical piece of mentorship to get them to understand, you can't live off of my inspiration. You have to find that motivational deep down within you that will push you to move even when you hit those hurdles.
Yeah.
You're going to have that self-motivation because no one else can do it for you.
That's kind of going with what you having us read about the hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
Stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, man. I've been reading.
I got you.
So before we close out, you got any words of encouragement for anybody out there?
Yeah, I think, we are in trying times. Depressing times. Some people don't know what will happen as a result of, this presidential election.
Yeah.
How do we grapple with the unknown?
Mm-hmm.
How do we define meaning in the unknown? And I think as people of color, as Black people, we find it in community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Black church will serve as a hub over these next 4 and beyond years that will recreate notions of what it means to be Black in America. So it's very important for us to collectively get together and talk about these things, talk about, frustrations and talk about, our lack of faith in God.
Yeah.
We talk about faith in God, but rarely do we go deep and say, you know what, I'm doubting God now because, I went for this interview, it didn't happen. I've been out of work for, 6 months and I'm going to church, I'm praying, I'm fasting, I put my money in, I pay my tithes, but nothing seems to be working. That can somehow push your faith.
Yeah.
So, at those moments, we have to be honest with ourselves, and community helps with that to say, you know what, brother, sister, I was in the same place.
Yeah.
I was in the same place, and trust me, it can get better. But what do you need?
Mm-hmm.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Not just giving them the words, but giving them the tools. What resources do I have that will help you in your circumstances? Do I have a connection at this place or that place, that will help you get on your feet?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's how we're gonna make it. We have to work together as a community.
Okay. So for those listening, if they want to purchase your book, where can they go to?
Sold out on Amazon, so do not go there. They can send me an email. I have several hard copies.
Mm-hmm.
So the email is, when we get the email,
Yeah, you get it.
It's D underscore.
What?
I'm giving you. You want me to get my personal or?
What?
I tell you what, stableconscience@gmail.com.
Okay.
Stable Conscience. That's STABLECONSCIENCE @gmail.com.
Okay, so that's where they can go to.
That's where you can go.
Okay.
That's where you can go.
Okay. Thank you for letting me interview you.
Thank you, sir. It's been a pleasure.
Okay.
It's been a wonderful job.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Culture and Cigars. Once again, I'm your host, Demetrius.
Without a cigar.
Yeah.
I need one.
Yeah. Maybe next time. To tune in, go to SoundCloud.com, subscribe, go to iTunes, and go to Google Play. Once again, leave me a comment or something, and I'll get back to you. Thank you once again.